Good morning. Can we start to take our seats, please, and let's make a start. We're already, I think, 5 minutes late for the CAP session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. We've got three speakers this morning before we then open the discussion up to the floor. We've got Willie Campman from the DBV. He does Maeve White, who heads our Brussels office up for the NFU, and the BAB office for Scotland and Wales as well. I describe him as a much more polite and respectful Maeve White is how I describe him for any of you who know Maeve. Willie picks up anything that goes to the DBV that isn't in German, I think was how Willie described his role. In the middle we have Gail Suter, who's done phenomenal work for us, both in Wales and certainly in England as well, making sure, talking and explaining all the proposals to farmers and getting the feedback. And when I made my comments yesterday about farmers being against modulation, about every single sector in every single part of the country hating modulation, that's the feedback Gail has had from talking to so many different farmers. We've also got Martin Nesbitt, who's going to speak second, from DEFRA, giving us the government's point of view. I think, we did have a bit of a touching the CAP discussion yesterday. I want to go into more detail today because actually we need to make progress on this. We need to try and find a way that we do meet those goals that the Secretary of State talked about of producing more food, about growing exports. And there is just a frustration that all we get focused on is shifting money for agri-environment schemes. And we generally want a dialogue, Martin, about how we find a way that we do maintain production, we keep productivity and being successful businesses at the forefront of our thinking, and also bear in mind fairness. And one of the points I find so frustrating is, I do think as a NFU of England and Wales, when Martin Howarth, who wrote The Real Choices however many years ago, we were the first proponents of decoupling, the first proponents of separating this money out. And the nonsense we heard yesterday, bluntly, about food mountains and coupled support and this driving food mountains, bluntly, that was McSharry, that was 21 years ago. We need to move on, and I do believe this is meant to be their session. I'm not going to get political, I'll sit down. Look, we do need to find a way of moving this forward, because at the moment it feels like at the NFU we've championed moving and evolving the CAP forwards. And what I do want to do is make sure we don't get penalised for it. Let's hand over to Willie Campman to start with a German perspective of where we are on the CAP. Willie, you can stay there, please.
Thank you very much, Peter. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to this important conference here of the National Farmers Union of in England here. Let me a bit bring the German perspective on the CAP debate, but before I come to the real factors of what is under discussion now in Brussels and hopefully decided on until June this year, that we have, let's say, a reliable policy in place. But let me put our sector, agriculture and the food sector, a bit in the wider context. Then farmers and also the food industry, we are part of the overall economy. We are also affected by the very deep financial and economic crisis we are going through in Europe. But we believe, and this is also rewarded in Germany, that farming and also the mid-sized food industry in Germany is a stabilizing element in this context. We have not seen that many losses in jobs and also decrease of, let's say, of growth rate. Although farming, the food industry is seen as a really stabilizing element. Just to underline the importance of the food chain in Germany, producers, processors, distributors, we provide in total 4.6 million jobs in Germany. That makes 11% of the total workforce in Germany, and with this we are, before the very famous car industry, the food chain is a very important pillar of the German economy. And I can assure you, this is politically rewarded, not just by the present government, maybe a different government we will have in September, but agriculture and the food chain is seen as a very important part of the German economy. And in this sense, Germany is also lobbying and fighting for reliable CEP for the farmers in the future. Maybe there are some differences, let's say, between the government we have running now, the conservatives with the liberals. Most likely we will have a change in September. It's not yet clear. Could be that we then have Social Democrats and the Greens running the German government. There are differences between, let's say, the differentiation of the CEP, but in general, all parties in Germany support a strong CEP of the European Union. I think this is clear, and this is also the clear message I give always to farmers. I do a lot of meetings with farmers in all regions of Germany. Then what is very dangerous when you are in Brussels and lose the ground with the farmers and the thinking and the spirit of farmers. Therefore, I try very hard to be on a regular basis in nearly all regions of Germany in discussions with farmers. And my message to farmers always is, the European agricultural policy for you as farmers is much more reliable than any national policy. I know I'm here in the United Kingdom with a very critical approach to the European Union, and I can assure you, although amongst German farmers, there is a lot of criticism what's going on in Brussels, with all the paperwork, with all the bureaucracy, for sure. But I always say there is no alternative for you, for your reliable, let's say for a basis of your business as a European Common Agricultural Policy. Point number 2, what is the economic situation of the farming sector in Germany? I'm now working in our organization, the German Farmers Organization, for over 30 years. I started in 1980. Was 20 years involved in the dairy business. Therefore, I know all the stories about quotas, etc., etc. I'm following it with great attention. But I can assure you, in this 30 years of experience, I have never seen, as we have nowadays, let's say, such relaxed and good and constructive meetings with farmers. The really relaxed discussions we have with farmers, and it was 20 years ago, it was absolutely terrible. Often I was driving home during night and I was thinking, why you are doing this? Yeah? Why you are doing this? To be blamed by farmers to do not the right politics or the right work for them. But this has changed. But what is important? What is the reason for this? You may ask, what is the reason for this? Number one, my feeling is farmers in Germany today are much more realistic than they used to be. I know here in the United Kingdom, British farmers have always been more realistic, what policy can deliver than not. But in Germany, it was a bit 20 years ago, as it is still the case in France, that farmers thought the politicians, they have to, let's say, to solve or to run our business or to take care of our business. So number one is farmers are much more realistic than they used to be. Point number two, and it's also important, is we see a clear trend in the markets, a clear change in the market trends. We had 4 decades of depressing prices worldwide on agricultural commodities and on food prices. 4 decades, prices going down and down and down and down. But since a few years, we see really a trend, and all prospects and all evaluations say in the next decades, prices for agricultural commodities will go up. Maybe not that extreme we saw in some years in the past, but there will be a steady increase, and that is a message which farmers like and understand best. To get their income from the market rather than from the agricultural policy. And point number 3 is increasing demand for food and bioenergy. Bioenergy is a new market, especially in Germany, for agriculture. You know, we have this energy change 2 or 3 years ago to switch off all nuclear plants, and this proportion of energy, nearly 20%, has to be replaced. So, and a part of this will be bioenergy or is bioenergy. There is still a critical discussions also about bioenergy, but I see there is on the mid or long term, I don't see an alternative, and we see all the bioenergy as a chance for farmers to stabilize the markets. So all in all, to finish this point, the mood in German agriculture amongst farmers is really good. A lot of farmers are ready to invest in their businesses. So let me now come to politics. And here we have 2 points discussing or under discussion in Brussels. One point has been finished by the head of governments 2 weeks ago. That's the financing of the European Union from 2014 to 2020. And number 2 is CAP. And hopefully, as I mentioned, we will have a decision on this political compromise until June this year. We are very optimistic, Peter, after our last session in Dublin a few days ago with the with the Irish presidency. They're really well prepared and really focused with clear ideas. We like this very, very much, and we wish all success to the Irish presidency to hammer out a deal in advantage of British and German farmers. But now a few words to the MFR, hammered out by the head of government 2 weeks ago. All in all, I can say the German DBV is quite satisfied with the deal. We are quite pleased. Point number 1 is that we have a deal at all, and that is, let's say, that the precondition for going on the details of the CAP reform. Even we see also significant losses in the budget in the coming years, though that means Germany will lose in the first pillar when you compare this 2 periods, 2007-2013 with 2014-2020, we will lose in first pillar around about 7%. In nominal terms, it's not less. And when you, let's say, you calculate it in real terms, the losses will be even higher. And in Pillar 2, we will lose some 9%. So it's quite a significant cut, but we evaluate this deal as a reliable basis for, let's say, now for a deal in the CEP. But we have also, in this context, we have to be realistic. We have to see, let's say, the overall financial and economic situation, which is very, very tight in a lot of countries, though that I think that was a good decision. But in the German media, in the news, this deal hammered out by the head of governments 2 weeks ago was mentioned as old-fashioned. Too much for agriculture, too less for research and innovation. But by the way, research is not a European policy, it's a national policy. When you put all the budgets together, the 27 member states pay on research, then it's 15 times the budget we have for agriculture. Therefore, I'm always a bit worried when research is coming on the top line. Research is a national policy, and agriculture is a European policy, and that's a big difference. But nevertheless, we need, although in Europe, a sound budget for research. But that was the media in Germany very critical. But when you really look on the figure, that's not true. That's not the case. When you project the deal into the future, you will see that the share of agriculture will fall under 30% until 2020, and all other spending lines will go up. That means we will lose relatively in the system. So I don't think that this decision was an old-fashioned one. We evaluate that it's really, let's say, for the well-being of Europe in total. Let me now come to the CAP reform. I guess you are aware of all these different elements under discussion now. Then we are discussing this since more than 3 years, the ideas of the Commission and the Parliament. We saw three reports in the Parliament. Everything, I think, it's well known. Let me just go shortly through the main elements and mark a bit what are the German positions. And I would like to underline here that the position of the German government, of the Agriculture Ministry, is very close to the position of DBV. There are not very big differences. That means the main lines, we have the same position, and I hope this will be the case until a deal done in June. Point number one I would like to mention is the Common Market Organization. We all know that the European Commission is following since the McSherry reform, since 1992, is following a strict orientation to more market orientation, to reduce intervention systems, to reduce supply management, to reduce interference into markets. We have in the beginning, we were quite concerned a bit about it. But today, our approach in Germany is totally different. Our farmers today are much more market-oriented than they used to be, as I already mentioned before. And we are very worried about a tendency in the Council and also in the European Parliament, a tendency to go back to more supply management, to go back to more increasing of market-regulated prices. For example, this so-called Dantin report, who proposes, after the end of the dairy quotas, a voluntary system for reducing quantities against compensation and a penalty for farmers who don't participate. We are really worried about it, and we don't want to see it happen. But we have to be realistic in the Parliament and also in the Council. There is quite a support for this. But the core issue is does such an instrument, does it make sense? And I don't think that it makes sense. We are confronted with more and more open and global markets. It's okay, the WTO deals is the Doha round is blocked. But when you look at the dynamic, the European Commission is dealing bilateral trade negotiations or trade deals. It's enormous what's going on there. Yes, with Canada, they're starting with the Americans. They are discussing with Ukraine, Mercosur. I guess in numbers, in total, there are 12 different trade deals the Commission is following at the moment, and all affecting in one way or the other agriculture. But I'm not very pessimistic about it. There are some risks for sure, but we have also a lot of chances in those deals. So for this background, I guess market regulation to have, let's say, to interfere into supply management, it will not help and, let's say, and support markets. Yeah.
Well, look, if I bring you back in when we have a bigger debate later on about some more specifics on CAP, that'd be really good. But we are just a bit short of time, so yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate the German perspective on CAP. The one I logged, Martin, as you stand up, was German government and DBV at one on CAP reform. Martin Nesbitt.
Peter, thank you, and thank you very much to the NFU for the invitation and for dinner and the hospitality last night. It's always an enjoyable challenge speaking to this audience, partly because of the closeness of position between the NFU and the UK government. And it was clear from some of Peter's comments yesterday that his usual impartial approach to chairmanship will be in full operation this morning, so we'll look forward to that. Anyway, I was going to talk through some of the elements in the recent European Summit deal on the budget and its implications, describe a little what happens next at European level and what the main subjects of discussion are in the negotiations at the moment, and then perhaps touch on the issue of decision-making at UK level and at England level, which is obviously going to be increasingly interesting to this audience as we get closer to it. So let's start with the numbers from the European Council deal. Essentially, as Vili was saying, we've ended up with a decline in both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. It's actually about a 13% decline in real terms over the whole period, a steady downward trajectory, but roughly stable in cash terms. The Council conclusions are incidentally available on the Europa website and are worth reading. I was tempted to put the whole text up on the screen and work through it just in order to squeeze out the time for questions, but I've decided not to, and I'll just give you a few excerpts instead. So one issue which is very controversial for a number of member states and also, of course, for some parts of the UK currently with a historic element to their allocation of direct payments. We'll start with convergence between member states. And that is the decision to move towards a more equal distribution among member states of the Pillar 1 budget. So where member states have an average payment per hectare which is below 90% of the EU average, they will come up about a third of the distance to that 90% over the course of the next period. That's roughly as the Commission proposed. What the new element that's been included at the insistence of some of the Baltic member states in particular, is that convergence should achieve at least 196 euros per hectare for all member states by 2020, and that will slightly accelerate the increase for some of the Baltic member states. And it does mean that there's a very slight increase in the share of the Pillar 1 budget that the UK will receive. Though there's then, of course, the discussion to be had about how exactly that's shared out within the UK. And, of course, I noted Peter's enthusiasm for equal per hectare payments across the EU, and no doubt that will apply to the NFU's approach to negotiations with Scotland. Sorry, I know Nigel's in the room as well, so I'm just demonstrating that I negotiate on behalf of the UK rather than just England. Obviously, from a UK point of view, we'd say that it's disappointing that we didn't achieve a bigger reduction in the overall CAP budget. We think that there could have been significantly steeper cuts available in Pillar 1, but in a sense this is a compromise, and that deal is the best that was finally available. Then on capping, very usefully from our point of view, because we don't think that capping is a useful mechanism. It's one that will just lead to avoidance tactics from farm businesses and would discourage economies of scale. Capping is made voluntary for member states, and our view is that also means that it's voluntary for regions. So that means that those ministers in devolved administrations within the UK who have expressed keenness on capping will be able to apply it at the level of their region if they so choose. Then moving on to the subject of greening, we've got a commitment from the European Council towards greening, but some quite interesting words here around the importance of avoiding an unnecessary administrative burden, and in particular the inclusion of language on the ecological focus area, which we think probably comes from in part from Vili's employers as much as from anywhere else, and says that we should not use the EFA to require land to be taken out of production, and we should avoid unjustified losses in the incomes of farmers. And that, I think, will be a helpful contribution to the Council discussion on EFAs, although it does quite radically transform the Commission's proposals. There's also a commitment to flexibility for member states in how they apply greening, and that is something that has been very important to the UK. Then a controversial subject, and I'm sure we'll come on to this in the questions, flexibility for transferring money between Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. Member states can transfer up to 15% to rural 15% from the Pillar 1 budget to rural development. There's also something that we're less happy with, and that's the option to transfer payments back from the Pillar 2 allocation from a member state into Pillar 1 payments. To be honest, we'd regard any member state taking advantage of that mechanism as simply demonstrating that it didn't need that Pillar 2 allocation in the first place. And that needs to be taken into account in the next financial perspective. I tried to find the right title for the next slide, but couldn't really come up with one, so we went with this instead. There's always a bit of horse trading in European Council discussions. I love the second paragraph here, which says that for a limited number of member states which face particular structural challenges, and then in the European Council conclusions you get a list of 17 member states, which I make it, it's about 2/3 of the total, allocated additional amounts under Pillar 2. Again, unsatisfactory from our point of view, but was necessary in order to reach an agreement. Anyway, let's move on, because Peter's probably checking his watch and worrying that he's not going to get enough time to question me, and touch on the process. We now need to see the European Parliament endorsing the budget deal and endorsing the numbers and how they will operate. The European Parliament is due in March, may slip until April, is due to adopt its position on the CAP reform proposals and set out what amendments it wants to see. The Council, that is Agriculture Ministers meeting in Brussels and Luxembourg, will be trying to bring their discussions to an end in March. I've put a question mark by that because there's still an awful lot of detail to get through in those negotiations. And we've got, I think, 2.5 weeks before the March Council. So I'm now slightly sceptical that we'll actually reach a deal in March. If we don't get it in March, though, I think we'll get it in April. And then Council and the European Parliament need to get together and try to resolve their two positions and hopefully reach an agreement by June. Again, I put a question mark by that because, again, there's an awful lot of detail to get through. That then means that Member States and paying agencies have around 18 months to implement for 2015. And it seems clear that 2015 is now the date that we're looking at. The deal we reach in June, or possibly a little later in the autumn, should start to provide some clarity for farm businesses, but we're also going to need a number of other elements, in particular clarity on how we run rural development programmes in the transitional year in 2014. We're going to need the detailed implementation rules from the European Commission, and increasingly we're going to have to start focusing on the implementation decisions in member states and regions. Some of the key remaining issues for the negotiations, Vili touched on a little of this. Obviously, the flexibility that the European Council has decided on for greening needs to be defined. So it's going to be decisions on how we treat green by definition, what sort of flexibility member states have, and how we deal with farms which are already in agri-environment schemes, how we ensure that those are equivalent to the greening proposals on the table. Then there's the issue of internal convergence within member states. So the process that we've already gone through in England to reach a single per hectare payment per region. Clearly that's important for Welsh members in this room. The next one looks very boring, but it says audit and mapping requirements. This will drive an awful lot of the complexity for paying agencies and for farm businesses in completing their claims. And the UK and the team working on the horizontal regulation at DEFRA has been leading the charge in Brussels in trying to get much more proportionality into an overly bureaucratic set of proposals from the European Commission. Then there will be the question of coupled payments. How much flexibility do member states and regions have to couple payments to production? And you will have heard very clearly from Owen Paterson yesterday that that's something where the UK will be opposed to anything that looks like an increase in coupled payments. And we would like to see a single low level of flexibility applying to all member states, so roughly 5% of the Pillar 1 ceiling. Then, as Vili touched on, there will be discussions around quota regimes, particularly the sugar regime. where it looks as if the European Parliament will be arguing for a continuation of quotas. I think we might end up with something which sets a later date for the phase-out than is in the European Commission's proposals. And I know the sugar session last night touched on that as well. And then also rules on producer organisations where there is some useful potential for producers to get together and to be able to negotiate in the marketplace, but also some risks of producer organisations in other member states being used in ways which we would see as distorting the internal market. I'll skip through this slide. I mean, a lot of the issues that Willy was referring to in the single CMO are, in a sense, the sort of things that Peter refers to when he describes as the cap as it used to be. And Peter's absolutely right to say that this is no longer really what the cap looks like, and ministers are wrong to imply that we're building up butter mountains or wine lakes and so on. But it still does impose significant costs on consumers and also on food businesses. And then finally, the issue of implementation decisions in the UK. So there's that question of the allocation of funding between the different parts of the UK. For Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, there's the issue of how to move away from historic payments, how quickly to do that, how potentially to bring in greater flexibility for new entrants. For England, there's clearly the question of the extent to which we make use of that option to transfer from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2, and you'll have heard the Secretary of State's views on that yesterday. Then there's a question of how to implement greening. Should it be a single scheme, similar to the entry-level scheme in England at the moment, but on a simplified, annualised basis? And how do we then adjust agri-environment schemes to reflect that? And how do we try to ensure that we're not making unjustified changes to agri-environment schemes that farm businesses have already signed up to? And then clearly a big focus on writing the next rural development programme for England. So I'm afraid I've cantered through that reasonably briskly. I've put my the DEFRA website page on CAP reform up there, and also my email address. And you know, I'm genuinely looking forward to the question session, because it is always useful to me to hear what people in this audience think. It's just possible we won't get through all of the questions, so if you want to punt any more questions to me, please do use that address. Or you know, if you just want to email me with vulgar abuse, I'm always perfectly happy to take delivery of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin. I'd welcome Gail. As I've already said, does an enormous amount of work for us, speaking all around the regions, both England and Wales. Picking up views, Gail.
Thank you very much, President. What I would like to start with is just a slide that the pressures of 2012 have certainly been well documented, both in recent months, but also over the past 24 hours at conference. But when DEFRA came out with its assessment of farm business income at the end of January, I think for many, they didn't necessarily come as a surprise, but they still made very sobering reading. The weather has played havoc across the whole industry, profits have been squeezed, and particularly in a year like 2012, the vital role that the CAP decoupled direct support payments make to farmers and their ability to maintain and continue in agricultural production for the future years really is brought to home. What I would like to do very quickly is again touch on the two main issues, the EU budget settlement that was hammered out at the start of February and the recent vote in the European Parliament. What I would like to do on both of those issues is just touch on some of the likely implementation choices that both DEFRA in England and the Welsh Government will have to make in the coming 12 months. So first issue is the European budget settlement. Now I really have to put a very big caveat and health warning on this information. The information that I'm going to give to you is based on leaked information. It is unofficial figures, but nevertheless it is doing the rounds in Brussels, and the NFU economics team have been able to do a preliminary assessment of what the settlement actually means at a UK level. We cannot yet say what it will mean for an English, Welsh Scottish or Northern Irish level, because clearly that's one of the major decisions that UK ministers will have to take, how to divvy up the pots of money available to the different parts of the UK. But looking at the Pillar 1 payments, the pot of money that is there to support the single farm payment and the basic payment going forward, the NFU economics team estimate that in real terms, if you were to take the 2013 budget as the baseline, that over the next 7-year period, the pot of money available in real terms would be cut by 10% compared to that 2013 baseline. What I would like to really point out from this slide, though, is the green bar here, that's the EU average payment, and the red bar here, that would be the UK average payment. So you can see from the slide that already the UK would be lower than the European average and significantly lower than some of our colleagues and competitors in the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, Germany, Ireland, France. And moving on to the Pillar 2 envelopes, the NFU economics team have estimated that the actual loss for Pillar 2 would be around 22% in real terms compared to the 2013 baseline budget. And in terms of the UK position, we retain the unenviable position of being bottom of the pile once again. I'm left, when I see that slide, wondering whether the UK government, when it went into the budget negotiations, went in looking to secure a fairer allocation of Pillar 2 money, or did it instead focus its entire strategy on being able to move money from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2 through the so-called voluntary modulation. This is a quote from DEFRA in mid-January, where they certainly welcome the transfers of 15%, but we're looking to increase that up to 20%. It certainly is a hollow victory to be able to say that they have now been pinned back to a maximum of 15% transfers. But nevertheless, there will obviously be some key decisions to be taken in the coming year about whether that transfers will take place. What we are seeing within the NFU and part of the coalition that was launched yesterday is that given the likely budget cuts to the rural development policy, that DEFRA needs to have a radical rethink of the ambition of its policy. And basically what we're saying is that DEFRA will have to cut its coat according to the cloth it has available to it. Moving on to the second issue in terms of the European Parliament's draft position, the MEPs on the Agriculture Committee responded very positively to a number of concerns that the NFU brought to their attention over the past year. I'll mention greening in a later slide, but on a number of more technical aspects relating to the active farmers test, entitlements, cross-compliance, they've certainly brought about some simplification compared to the Commission's proposals. For our Welsh members, the MEPs responded to the call to have a longer, flatter transition period towards the flat rate payment model. Of interest to many of us is that the way in which the farm payments will be converted from euros into sterling, the MEPs would base that on the average of a month compared to the taking one date, as is currently the case. And for our sugar growers, the MEPs have again responded to our calls to maintain the sugar quota beyond the 2015 expiry date, but of much more critical importance to maintain that interprofessional agreement, which is critically important to our growers. Unfortunately, the MEPs didn't deliver everything that the NFU was asking, and there are a number of concerning aspects relating to the direct payments. I'm not going to mention the market management tools, we can discuss that in discussion, but in terms of the direct payments, the areas of concern to us would be the fact that a majority of MEPs supported increasing the scope for coupled support payments from the Commission's proposal of 5% up to 15%, and we are extremely concerned that that is turning the clock back, and we want to see, and we will continue to lobby to try and pin that 15% back down to that 5% that was originally proposed. We're obviously still concerned that the MEPs have supported what has now been a decision of the European Council, the heads of state and government, to have 15% voluntary modulation in the future cap. And the majority of MEPs also supported proposals to retain capping. Now, it's interesting that the heads of state have made it voluntary, so clearly the European Parliament's position will continue to evolve and develop, and I'm quite sure that some of those decisions taken in the European Council will impact on the Parliament's position. If I touch back onto greening, the European Parliament's ComAgri made significant changes to the Commission's original greening proposals. Many of those concerns we talked about last year here in this breakout session, MEPs have responded to our requests. The first request was that we asked that farmers would be able to forego that 30% aid and still manage to retain the 70%. The MEPs have decoupled the link between the greening aid and the basic payment, so that could be an option for farmers. They've also included more categories known as this green by definition. So, for example, if you are a beneficiary of an agri-environment scheme, then the MEPs would say that you would be automatically entitled to the greening aid. Similarly, if you're an organic farmer or if you're farming in a Natura 2000 site. Another interesting development was that the MEPs said that farmers who have 75% permanent grassland, and if the remainder of their land is less than 50 hectares, then they too would be exempt from having to do the crop diversification and ecological focus area requirement under greening. If a farmer didn't find himself in one of those green by definition or exemption categories, then yes, he would have to do the 3 greening requirements, but again, there has been significant progress in each of those areas. What has been the reaction to some of those changes? Well, in Wales, under the Welsh Government, they have made an assessment that some 86% of farms would qualify under that 75% permanent grassland option, and that more farmers would then be brought in if the derogation that if you were in an agri-environment scheme applied in Wales as well. And they're welcoming that derogation and seeing it as an important point, important step forward. Where we are concerned is with DEFRA's alternative vision for greening. The European rules for greening is coming along. We know what the framework is likely to be, but we are concerned that the policy aspiration from DEFRA is to deliver something different here in England. And basically what I think it can be summarised that they want to have a simple greening, we've got no issue there, to deliver meaningful environmental outcomes that are commensurate with the level of support envisaged. And what the Secretary of State has announced previously is that he wants to use a mechanism similar to our existing entry-level scheme for environmental stewardship in England. Now, why are we concerned about that? Well, we're concerned because a lot of those choices and options that I talked about earlier in terms of the European greening, 75% grassland if you're already in an agri-environment scheme, if you're an organic farmer, it looks to us like as if DEFRA's preferred road is to impose a sole delivery method, something similar to ELS, and that will close off options that are available to our farmers. What we believe is that English farmers, like those in the other parts of the UK and across the EU, should have a choice of the greening options, and most certainly greening should not impose higher standards or higher compliance costs on English farmers than our competitors. And I thought it was quite apt to put up this quotation for you. I won't try and keep up with it. The key point is that we want to create a level playing field with our foreign competitors when it comes to regulation. Our government often imposes far more onerous standards on British agriculture than exist elsewhere in the EU. These can have perverse consequences. Instead of driving standards up, they just drive farmers out of business. I think it's quite an apt quotation to describe well the concerns that the NFU has about DEFRA's approach to greening, and that was made by David Cameron at the NFU Conference in 2008. And Chairman, if I close on my final slide, what I would like to do is once again flag up to both the members of the media, to the members of NFU and to the government, the launch of our Fair Deal for Farmers coalition. The NFU, the TFA and the CLA came together, collectively and have agreed a number of principles that we want to see government consider in terms of implementing the future CAP. Over the course of the last 24 hours, the coalition has grown. There are a number of other industry partners that have come on board, and I certainly hope that over the next 12 months, as decisions are taken both here in England and in Wales, that our number one objective to try and secure a fair deal for farmers is heard loud and clear in government. Thank you.
It'd be nice to see how much of David Cameron's quotes we can get into 140 characters to put out on a hashtag, wouldn't it, just to stir the debate a bit. Look, I think we've got a really varied presentation there. You know from Gail, putting into real detail the concern we have as English farmers. What we have got is a couple of microphones. I think Anna's got one at the front here, Lollipop 2, and Victoria's there with number 1. Do you just want to put your hands up at the back? I can't see very well because of the light. Philip Merrick's at the back. And then there's another one I can't see. It's a bit difficult with the lights. Just put your hands up. Fairly short and punchy, please, because we've only got about 25 minutes for questions.
Thank you, President. My name's Philip Merrick, a farmer from South East England. We've just heard from Peter and Gail many very good reasons why proposed greening measures are unpopular for farmers. You know, ecological focus areas making farming less profitable and less productive. But Chilos makes the point that greening gives political legitimacy for the CAP. And my question is, of course, to Martin, is it politically necessary for greening to deliver genuine and real environmental benefits? If that is it possible to do this without fouling up farming and farming productivity and farming efficiency? And if so, what measures can you suggest, Martin? What real measures can you suggest?
Should we take one more? Let's take another one at the same time. Is that Peter Gadd as well?
Yeah. Hello, that's one. Thank you, Mr. President. I make no apology, quick and punchy. Yesterday I raised the issue of greening and modulation. Whatever greening we get at the farm gate level, it has to be cost effective for a sustainable business. Many farmers in this country are small family farms where every acre has to count. 200 and 300 acre arable farms with a bit of mixed livestock sometimes. That's the backbone of our industry, certainly in England. And quite honestly, if we can't implement these greening measures effectively to maintain a sustainable business, then we're out of business. And so is the countryside, because we produce the countryside. Thank you.
Martin, do you want to go first? I wouldn't mind asking Willie about how you think they might implement greening in Germany second. Martin, go first.
Yeah. Okay. Philip's question first, and Commissioner Cholos's point that greening is necessary to ensure the legitimacy of the CAP budget. I mean, obviously, you know that we have a slightly different view, and the government takes a slightly different view on the legitimacy of some chunks of the CAP budget to that of Commissioner Cholos. I think I would take the view that greening potentially makes the money that goes into greening a legitimate element of European expenditure. You still then need to ensure that it is being used cost effectively. Is credible greening that delivers measurable environmental benefit going to be essential for that legitimacy of the CAP budget? I think yes. I think if you have a situation where a reform which is supposed to be based around greening takes place, and then it's easy to see that a majority of farms aren't actually having to do anything at all because they are regarded as green by definition and somehow excluded from doing anything. And you make very little inroads to the environmental issues that the Commissioner was targeting with its proposals, then I think it would be very difficult to defend the budget at the next financial review, and you would get increasing criticism over the course of the next 7 years. Can we do it without fouling up productivity? I think we have to. I think that is the challenge for European agriculture. It is how to deliver improved environmental outcomes and continue to improve productivity and the level of production from the EU. What we don't want is a situation where constraints on production within Europe are simply leading to higher levels of environmental degradation and higher levels of greenhouse gas emissions outside the EU. Yes, I would certainly agree that greening needs to make sense for a sustainable business. Essentially, this needs to be a deal between grown-up parties in essentially a business relationship. Government, on behalf of the wider public, is going to be buying from farmers an environmental service. If the money that government is making available for that environmental service is not sufficiently attractive to the farm business won't do it. Owen Paterson has recently been making the point that he particularly accepts that there are areas of the UK where it's genuinely very difficult to sustain a farm business which delivers a decent income without additional public support, and he's made clear that particular element of his view about the arrangements for the uplands in future.
Willie, where do you think greening will go in Germany?
I don't believe, or in Germany it's not the case, that the CAP budget is really linked to greening. That's, it's a message of Cholos, but we don't, that's true. At least in Germany, let's say, in the society, there is a wide support for farmers and for the CAP. And the biggest mistake, in my opinion, Cholos and the Commission made to the, let's say, to the media and to the wider public, with this greening element, he failed to explain first what farmers are already doing in the sense of greening. And we have in Germany two figures. Let's say 30% of all agricultural land in Germany is managed under voluntary environmental schemes with strict obligations for farmers, and they are compensated for this via second pillar. We have some regions in the south of Germany, it goes up to more than 60%. And farmers in those regions, they are asking me, what in the hell we should doing else? We are green. Though, and that we see it as the biggest fault of Cholos, and we saw in the council there was some struggle about greening, that, you know, first of all, okay, everything fine with greening. Okay, but first of all, he should have explained what we are already doing as farmers. So, and then let's discuss, there are some regions in the European Union, in the 27 member states, where we have problems. I'm really aware of this, but we should attack these problems in these regions where this is the case, and not in England or in Germany. We are green by definition. Therefore, two key points for Germany. Key point number one, or let me say before, I don't see that we can green the 30% greening element from the table. I don't believe this. It's politically highly sensitive, has been acknowledged by head of governments. In this sense, two key points. When there is greening 30%, no link to the basis premium. No link to the basis premium, that is important. And as Gail already mentioned, we need more flexibility. First of all, to reward what farmers are already doing in environmental scheme, in certified farm schemes, what else? Yeah, grassland. Any case, there are some elements where we need much more flexibility. That it's let's say that we have a practical solution, and not undermining the productivity and the volume of produce of England and also Germany.
Thank you, Willie. Just Martin, in my usual spirit of impartial chairmanship, you said that any greening payments must be sort of demonstrate the value, and that'll help us legitimise the budget going forward. Slightly bizarre now that England is actually going to carry the banner for defending the EU budget. I just think that's slightly perverse in that, you know, by our greening being done so well and all those belt and braces, that we'll now be leading the charge on defending this spend.
You may not have been listening to the bit where I said that it legitimises the payment that's going into greening, provided it's cost effective. What we don't think it legitimises is the basic payment.
So, it's interesting that we're now going to try and demonstrate for Europe.
So, and we've always made the point that funding through the EU for public benefit, particularly environmental public benefit, is justified, and Owen has been very clear on that.
Guy and Martin, just take those two.
I think we're all agreed as the NFU that we are opposed to greater levels of modulation other than our competitors in the rest of the EU. However, it worries me that we're going to get it whether we like it or not. Listening to our Minister or our Secretary of State yesterday, he doesn't strike me as the sort of bloke that changed his mind easy and they've made their minds up they're going to max out this level of modulation. In light of that, should we be engaging more in trying to use Pillar 2 money so we can invest in the productive capacity of our farms rather than just abandoning them all to some madcap idea that if we abandon farms you get more wildlife, which is one of the lies DEFRA need to get rid of. And so my question is Martin, are you up for this conversation that we can use Pillar 2 money to invest in the productive capacity of our farms? I mean, I'd like some money to redrain my Essex Marsh, if you don't mind. Gail, are we engaging fully in that debate? And I'd wonder what the DBV position is on using Pillar 2 money for investing in the productive capacity of farms rather than just financing environmental schemes.
Martin?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. President. It follows on from this question. Martin Howlett from Cornwall, actively involved in environmental schemes to the highest level for several years. Clearly, this time last year, when the question was put as where greening was going, we were told very outright by Commissioner Chalos that we will not penalise the champions. That obviously is being held same view in Germany with Willie in saying the same thing. 60% of this country has gone in with voluntary modulation, voluntary greening schemes through the ELS and HLS. Clearly now the suggestion is coming from the Secretary of State that the greening element, oh well, you haven't got to do extra, we'll just count what you're already doing. The question was put to you last year, Martin, how are you going to get round double funding? It appears now, the suggestion is that you're asking now for us to do greening on the cheap, and that isn't acceptable. Clearly we make commitments on a voluntary basis to use marginal parts of our farm to go into environmental schemes. Now, all it's actually been doing is passed off as ticking the box, and that isn't putting any money into anybody's pocket or helping anybody. Please, can you answer where you're going to go on this?
I think the point as well, Martin, you made is that whatever we get in the greening, we should do measures that are commensurate with it. I'm nervous because my ELS, my ELS I came out of a year ago, paid me £12 an acre, £30 a hectare. If my greening sums are correct, that could be up to £60 a hectare. Are you going to double up what I do to make sure it meets with what you said a few moments ago?
Okay, let's start with Guy's question. I think the answer to the question, should you engage in thinking about investing in productive capacity of farms, I think the answer is a very definite yes. I know Sarah Hendry is here today and would be delighted to have a conversation about that with anyone who wants to have a conversation about it. And it was very interesting listening to Owen Paterson yesterday that when he was talking about the option of transferring funds to Pillar 2, he was very much focused on competitiveness issues and improving productive capacity, as well as the delivery of agri-environment schemes. And I know that the NFU has been engaged in those discussions so far, and I think it is genuinely a subject where there's considerable openness among the ministerial team and in DEFRA to listen to views. But I think we do also need to find ways of ensuring that we can at least deliver the agri-environment benefits that we're currently getting from entry-level stewardship and the higher level schemes. And without some flexibility to transfer from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2, that is clearly in doubt. Presenting the numbers in ways that make sense to individual farm business is going to be tricky from this. But one of the things that's already happened in the European Council deal is that the old compulsory modulation element has already, in a sense, been shifted from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2 in the numbers that we're looking at. So that funding is already there. The 15% transfer from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2 available to member states essentially replaces the flexibility that we used to have for national modulation So that it won't be on top of the national voluntary modulation element that we currently impose. And what essentially we're looking at is how we ensure that we can deliver at least the current agri-environment benefits, and ideally generate a little bit of funding for a little bit more. Going back to what I said earlier, clearly that needs to make sense for the individual farm business. If it doesn't make sense for the individual farm business won't want to do it. And one of the areas where we have been entirely in agreement with the NFU is that the greening payment should be a voluntary payment. We think you get a much better level of engagement and a much better level of commitment if it is something which is volunteered for by the business rather than imposed on the business.
Sorry, Willie, there was a quick question about whether any Pillar 2 money is being used to aid productivity in Germany.
Point one is a shift of Pillar 1 money to Pillar 2. We are really reluctant to it, and the reason is because, let's say, responsibility for Pillar 2 money are the regional governments. So, and that means we will have then 16 different regulations in Germany. So there are regions they use this money for let's say, for constructing playgrounds or village parks or what else, and just the minor share is going to farmers. That's what us concerns. But where we are really lobbying very hard for is also to have, let's say, funding from Pillar 2, for example, for incentives for farmers for investment. For investing, to give some let's say, some preference to interest rate, etc., that farmers can invest in their business and develop their businesses. I hope we can manage this in Germany with ongoing business and hopefully with a new one. But the biggest problems we see is that Pillar 2 money is too less focused on agriculture. It's a toolbox for the regions, and when I see in Germany the range of different measures and instruments, let's say the governments can use, and it's very dangerous when this not has to be co-financed. Up to now we have this co-financing by 50%. Then let's say the regional governments are a bit reluctant, and they have to put their own money. But foreseen is for the shift. There's no co-funding. Oh my God, what will happen with this money?
Okay, Gail, despite obviously the Prime Minister's incredibly short memory from what he said in 2008 when he was electioneering, he went there saying we needed 20% shift from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2, because I think when you've done some work with our economics department, the 15% that they've now got doesn't cover the current spend. Would that be all right? Do you think there's a shortfall? For current spend as it is today, the 15% wouldn't cover it.
I think, I mean, it's very difficult to speculate on how much money we will have available to the English rural development pot. There hasn't been decisions taken yet in terms of how we will divvy up the UK pot between the regions of the UK. But clearly, if we are to see a 22% cut in real terms at the UK level, then that means that there will be less money available for the rural development programme in England, and hence why we are saying that that requires a radical rethink of rural development policy in the future. At the moment, 80% of the English rural development programme is spent on agri-environment schemes. If we're going to have this greening in Pillar 1, which I agree with all the speakers, it is inevitable now, I'm afraid, that we will have this greening in Pillar 1, we believe that that then reduces the need to transfer money from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2 for more environmental actions in Pillar 2. I certainly think, as an industry, we still have a long way to go with the Secretary of State before we concede that he moves the full 15% across from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2. I think that's a fight that we're certainly all up for, certainly within the NFU and the coalition partners over the last couple of days. If he were to take that full 15%, and let's be clear about this, we have 9% voluntary modulation at the moment. That's the highest rate applied in England across the whole of the UK, where the UK is the only country that does it at the moment. We're talking about turning that 9% into a maximum of, say, 15%. just to be clear about what percentages we're talking about here, 9%, possibly up to 15%. If we did that, the gap in terms of payment levels between English farmers and our competitors in Europe, making a big leap of faith about where English budgets might end up, we're talking about a difference in payments of around €115 with our Dutch competitors, 112 with our Belgian competitors, 62 with our Danish, 28 with our Germans. So there's certainly some significant differences where governments take that full 15%. So I think we definitely have to engage with government. There will be a consultation coming up shortly on the future rural development, but we start from the position that the world, the budget has meant we are going to have a radical rethink of the priorities.
Gail, bearing in mind how strident the Secretary of State was yesterday about modulation and his determination to use it, could he, if the budgets don't balance, could he actually use the whole UK envelope to take English farmers more than 15%?
Yeah, I mean, the way that the draft regulations are all at the moment, it's all about the member states. So the UK, as the member state in Brussels, would be allowed to transfer 15% of its envelope from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2. If the other regions of the UK didn't apply voluntary modulation, and we know that in Northern Ireland they have taken the decision not to apply voluntary modulation in 2013, there could be headroom that meant that DEFRA within England could use headroom in England. Similarly, with the coupled support payments, we would have concerns that that could apply to allow Scotland to have higher coupled payments than if they were a member state in their own right.
Perhaps strident wasn't the right word, Martin.
My ministers are never strident. Our stakeholders are sometimes strident, but the ministers are never strident.
Never.
Just on that issue of potential use of the 15% in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, that certainly hasn't been in our thinking. I would be surprised if the Commission read the regulation in the same way as Gail does. Although, you know, if you like, we could go back to the office and rerun our calculations on that basis, because it might be quite attractive. But, you know, to be honest, I just don't think that's going to happen. And, you know, just while I'm taking up time from the questions, you know, Gail was making the point that there are people out there in other European countries with significantly higher payment rates per hectare. There are also people with significantly lower payment rates per hectare. And I think the key for us in the European negotiations is to ensure that there isn't an unfair competitive impact on English and UK farming from payments elsewhere. And Peter quite rightly corrected the Secretary of State yesterday when the Secretary of State started talking about the building up of grain surpluses and butter mountains and so on. And Peter said that the Pillar 1 payment doesn't affect what we produce on our farms. So it's a decoupled payment which is not leading someone else to produce more and thereby drive down the price available to English farmers. And I think we just need to keep hold of that and that fundamental fact when we start discussing the issue of fairness. I mean, if you like, I could go into discussions with the Treasury on my salary and say it's deeply unfair that civil servants in The Hague get paid twice as much as I do, but I don't think it's going to work.
I think you're fairly selective in how I define the value of single farm payment. It wasn't time to go into resilience, risk management, how you deal with extremes of weather, market volatility, etc. Perhaps for another day. There's Jeremy Moody and David Horton as well. Jeremy, were you asking a question or not? No. David Horton, please, here. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. President. David Horton from Devon. Did I hear rightly at the beginning, sir, that there was rumblings to put something in place to replace or as an alternative to the milk quota system? How loud are these rumblings? And is there somebody keeping a strong eye on that and not concentrating on all this other happenings and missing a trick there? Would you comment, please?
Let's take David Brooks as well, and we'll come back to the question.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm slightly confused here, which isn't difficult. I think I was encouraged yesterday listening to what the Minister said, because he's actually going to move money to allow me to buy some robotic milkers. I don't know whether that was because they're manufactured in his constituency. I think that's got to be quite encouraging if we're going to be able to have that sort of capital investment on our farms funded by European support. Because my single payment used to be probably more than my 13th milk cheque. Certainly my single payment that arrived on my doormat on the 1st of December wasn't equal to the one that I had following the milk price cuts. So I look forward to being able to put new robots in and spend some money on my farm to increase my productivity.
Just on picking on Guy Smith's point and yours, David, that there's some sort of mysterious new money out there. As I've said, where we sit at the moment, we think there's already a shortfall of 15% modulation to do the environmental schemes we've got now. The attraction is, every time you say, I want some money back, where do they get it from? Let's be realistic. There's no new money out there other than our modulation. That's where it's going to come from. Gail.
If I can just pick up David's point on the supply milk management concerns. You're right, Mr. Campman referred to the European Parliament's position that they would like to see some kind of supply management tools at times of crisis introduced after the end of the dairy quotas come to an end. The NFU is opposed to that, and what we have done is we've signed up with our industry partners in Germany, in Ireland, across other parts of the EU, and we have written to key members of the European Parliament to object to that element being brought in. So, rest assured, we do talk a lot about the direct payments, about greening, about modulation, but the other aspects of the CAP reform are on our agenda as well, and that particularly is something that Mansell Raymond, who is the chairman of the COPA European Milk Board, has also brought to the attention in Brussels.
Just on that, yes, we are very much keeping an eye on that. What I'd say to people in this audience is that isn't yet necessarily the European Parliament's opinion. We've just had a vote through the Agriculture Committee, and the plenary session, so the whole of the European Parliament will need to endorse that position and may be able to make changes to it. So, write to your MEPs from your regions now and make them aware of what you think is important. We'll be in agreement on that one. We might not be in agreement on everything what you want them to look at, but I think Vili was referring to the Single Common Market Organisation regulation in his talk, and I very much agree with him that there are some very worrying elements of that, and I think it's going to be important that the Council position is in favour of a continued trajectory of reform and a continued trajectory of avoiding interference with the market.
I've got one last question, then we need to wrap up. Mark Leggett at the back, please, on number 2. Thanks, Anna.
Yes, Mark Leggett, Lincolnshire. Firstly, if we are going to gain advantage in terms of raising competitiveness on our farms using Pillar 2 money, my plea is, could we please have a wider remit of spend allowable on the farm? I don't think £20,000 on a rainwater harvesting scheme is probably the best spend I can have on my business to improve my competitiveness. And I think in the past the list has been very restrictive in what we can actually get regional development money for in the past. So I think that needs to widen a bit. My question, though, goes to both Willie and to Martin and concerns the greening. We keep reading references in the farming press that pulse production in the EU is at an all-time low, and there are references to try and kick-start the pulse production again of homegrown protein by allowing those people who are growing pulses to count that towards the greening element. What do you believe to that? What do you think to that concept, and what do you believe is the likelihood that it will be incorporated into greening measures as an allowable option for those growers who are not currently in an agri-environmental scheme? Thank you.
Sorry, Martin,
shall I have a go on that? On rural development, I don't think, I may be wrong, but I don't think that there were the sorts of restrictions on on investments that you were describing. Certainly, my experience, admittedly, from some years ago of running the project-based elements of rural development was that we were reasonably open to anything that met with the conditions in the European legislation. Going back to Peter's point about there being no new money available, Peter's right that we're not going to be showered suddenly with huge quantities of cash, but to the extent that we can deliver some of the environmental benefits we currently get from entry-level stewardship through greening in Pillar 1, that potentially frees up resources in Pillar 2 to fund other things, including investments in competitiveness. there's a discussion to be had about that. Then on the question specifically on pulses and protein crops, we think the idea of a coupled payment for protein crops is pretty much as bad as most coupled payments. There may be some sense in developing a mechanism which looks at nitrogen fixation as an element in delivering greening, and I think there's a conversation to be had about that when we come to design the exact nature of greening mechanisms in England. But I think a situation that simply gave people a chunk of money for something that they were doing, in any case, as a sensible agronomic measure, would be questionable.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we are also thinking one element of flexibility in greening is allowing farmers to produce protein crops. But the key question is, there is, let's say, at least in Germany, there's no protein crop around what is, let's say, what is in a way effective as compared to soya or to rapeseed. That's a problem. But in principle, we see protein crops, we see as an element in the flexibility, introducing more flexibility in the sense of greening. But we are not thinking about a coupled payment for protein crops, because this also causes difficulties in the context of WTO. As I guess there are some other countries going on with coupled premiums for, let's say, for suckler cows in France or sheep, etc. And we have just the limit on in the blue box allowed for coupled payments in the WTO context. Thank you.
Thank you. I need to wrap up, and look, I do appreciate that we haven't had that many time for questions, but you can see there's a really long way to go. I'm going to take my chairman's prerogative, and I know I have a chance to speak a bit later on. The worst scenario, we put enormous chunks of ELS into Pillar 1. 55%, as Gail said in her presentation, of farmers are green by definition just because of the grass they have on their farms. Plenty of others will already have 3 crops. They could demonstrate they don't need to do much more for greening. We'll end up big chunks of greening in Pillar 1. And having heard the Secretary of State yesterday, because in principle that's what he wants, we'll have 15% modulation. There's a long way to go in how we sort this out. I think we have to show the industry the discussion that's been had about how we make sure we get the right environmental outcomes. We've heard the commitment you got from Tesco's yesterday. You heard about the importance to the economy. We want to make sure we're looking after the environment, but with least government interference possible. The examples Willie's given us are really strong and really powerful. And what we will do is we will, as an organisation, take our campaign, we'll sign up other organisations, and we'll get in front of MPs and explain that it does matter that the dairy farmer in the Secretary's constituency is getting €200 a hectare less than his counterparts in Denmark and Sweden. We will point out that when we were bottom of the league table, that does make an impact, and it doesn't take a very big farm to be £30,000 a year worse off when you have the volatility we've had over recent years. It is incredibly frustrating, despite Gail's example of what the Prime Minister said. When you find 26 member states all trying to find ways of helping their farmers, you get one government saying we want 20% modulation. It's incredibly frustrating, especially with all those positive pre-election promises that were made by the Prime Minister. When the government wants our help to give leadership on CMOs and argue about not market distortion, we're up there. We do that because we believe in it. We believe in decoupled markets. And then when we get comments made that Pillar 1's wasteful and its farmers arguing for free money, it's not building that sort of alliance to try and drive this industry to be more progressive, more competitive, and more market-focused. It's a long way to go. Thank you very much indeed, speakers, for all your time. Thank you very much.